Let's use this Vortex Impact 4000 and my Tremor 3 reticle to put some rounds on steel. So first up, a 12-inch plate out there at 570 yards, calling for 2.6 mils. Wind is almost dead calm. Impact. Impact. Now we'll transition over. 2/3 dipstick. $775 yards. 4.4 mils. Off the left edge. Impact. 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 Let's move into how this is possible. Hey there, and welcome back. Really appreciate you stopping by to check out another one of my videos. This is going to be a pretty cool one because it's around one of the fundamental concepts of long-range shooting. And that's the question of, do you use the turrets on your scope to dial the necessary correction to make an impact out at distance? Or do you use the reticle and the optic to hold over to make that impact? Now, ultimately, both options will be effective and will put rounds on targets. But what I want to do in this video is give you a side-by-side comparison of how these actually look out at distance. So what we're going to do in this video is use my rifle. I've got a solid 100-yard zero on it. Now I'm going to put up some steel out at distance. I'm hoping something between maybe 400 and 1,000 yards. And what I want to do is run through a course of fire and show you exactly what it looks like to make impacts on steel out at distance, dialing my elevation turret, and holding over in the scope. And then at the end of the video, we'll wrap up with a quick summary where I'll talk about my thoughts and experiences running both of those solutions out to distance, so that maybe you get an idea where each makes sense, because it is valuable to know how to do both. They both have a place in the long-range shooter's toolbox. It's just understanding where they make sense. So from here, we'll move into a quick close-up gear review where we'll look at the rifle we're going to shoot, and then we'll start shooting steel out there at distance, and we'll wrap up at the end of the video with my thoughts. Let's take a close-up look at the gear we're going to run in this video. For a rifle, we're going to shoot my Barrett Mrad in 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, this is a rifle you've seen many times previously on the channel. I really enjoy shooting this rifle. It is super easy to shoot accurately out to distance. And with the 6.5 barrel installed, it's very light recoiling, and we've got plenty of caliber to get us out to 1,000 yards and beyond. For a suppressor, we're using the Surefire 7.62 SOCOM Mini. This is a can I've run on many rifles on the channel. It's small, lightweight, knocks the blast down, makes it easier to shoot multiple rounds throughout a day. For an optics package, we're going to spend a lot of time here, so we'll go in detail. So this is a Nightforce 7-35 ATACR F1 scope with a Tremor 3 reticle. Now, I wanted to run this scope because of the reticle. That Tremor 3 is a Christmas tree style reticle, which can be intimidating to some maybe that haven't had a ton of time behind it or are more used to running a more traditional style crosshair reticle. This scope, though, with this reticle, I feel like is a great tool to show off the concepts here. So as I mentioned, we're zeroed at 100 yards. And what I'm going to do in this video for part of it, when I dial, I'm only going to dial my elevation turret for my elevation hold. For windage, I always hold that left or right. You think about windage and why I do that. Windage is always changing. You're always going to be adjusting, so I don't like to dial on the windage turret. So when I'm dialing in this video, I'm only going to be dialing elevation to what's called for by either this Vortex Impact or my shooter app, and then holding left or right for windage. When we're holding over in the reticle, I'm going to do both. I'm going to hold my elevation and my windage. So we're going to use the grid and that Tremor 3 reticle to make that shot. What I think you're going to see in this video, though, is both options are going to put rounds on target. It's going to be really interesting to hear in the comments your thoughts around which option maybe is best for you or which you prefer and why. I think I've got plenty of distance here to really illustrate my thoughts on why or where each of these options make sense. And I hope that comes through in this video. So let me know as we go through this video, what are your thoughts? What are you seeing? Maybe what would you like to see me do differently, or what could I do to improve? Now this 7-35, it's first focal plane, so you'll notice as I adjust my magnification, that reticle size is going to change. So as I zoom in, that reticle becomes bigger, and that limits the amount of elevation that I can hold in that reticle. So I have to zoom out to actually get more usable reticle to shoot out at distance. And I'll try to show that as we move on in the video. Now, one of the really cool things that I'm using in this video is my new Vortex Impact 4000 weapon-mounted laser rangefinder with onboard ballistic calculator. Now, this was provided to me by Ally Munitions, so these are going to be my first rounds. This thing just showed up this week. I just mounted it up. I did the calibrations. I got the ballistics set up for the 6.5 Creedmoor. In this video, we're shooting the 130 ELDM. It's running about 2,900 feet per second. I'm going to use that load, as that is a load that I have plenty of experience on this rifle with, so I know how it should behave out to distance. Because what I want to do in this video is actually use the rangefinder to range the target, and then use the elevation hold that comes up in the rangefinder to make my impact. So from here, let's go ahead and set up the steel. As I mentioned, I've already got that 100-yard zero, so we'll use that as our baseline. We'll move out, I'm hoping between 400 and 1,000 yards. And I plan to shoot a course of fire, holding over in the reticle, and then dialing, and at the end we'll wrap up. But again, let me know what you see throughout this video. I'd love to hear it. So let's get into the shooting. Before we shoot steel, let's talk about what I did from 100 yards to get ready to make these shots. So as you can see, at 100 yards, I ran a handful of rounds across the chronograph and actually got an average of 29.50. From there, I needed to go into the Vortex and correct that number so that it spits out the correct bullet drop. It took me just a little while to do that, but I was able to go in and make that correction up to 29.50. So now this thing should be pretty correct for the bullet that we're shooting. You can see there at 100 yards, 5 rounds across the chronograph. That's a beautiful group. It probably measured in the 3/4 of an inch range. Then I fired 5 rounds without the chronograph to verify my zero, and those measured also probably in that 3/4 of an inch range. So accuracy-wise, I'm very happy. Velocity-wise, it's decent, and I've corrected the Vortex. Now, this first string of fire, I'm going to hold my elevation versus dial. It's important to note my scope is going to be left on 15 power for the majority of the shooting that we're going to do. So from here, let's get into position, and we will go ahead and range our target. So I also zeroed the Vortex. This Vortex is about 3 inches above my scope, which is 0.8 mils at 100 yards, so that's where I zeroed it. And a little trick, in full daylight like this, you're not going to see the laser out of this thing, so if you shine it at the back of your pickup and hit your license plate, it will reflect even in full sunlight. So I was able to get zeroed. With that, we're going to range 0.8 above my crosshairs with this Vortex. So my first target out here is a 12-inch circle. I'm going to point at it and hit the Vortex. 570 yards. Calling for 2.6 mils. I've also put in 5 miles an hour of 3 o'clock wind, but it is very calm. So this first round, let's go 2.6 to the right edge. Impact. Beautiful. Pretty centered up. Impact. So there you can see, holding over, we had no problem connecting. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and dial that same 2.6 mils up. So on my elevation turret, I'm up 2.6. And now, instead of holding over, I'm going to use the crosshairs as my point of aim. So we're going to get the exact same performance. Let me show you that. So now I'm going to use the crosshairs, right edge target. Impact. Impact. All right, so 570 yards, a 12-inch plate is no problem. This Vortex is spot on. Let's push out further. Next up, I've got a 2/3 IPSC for us to shoot. we're going to transition over there, and I'm going to show you the process of making that shot. So remember, my elevation turret is up 2.6. But remember, I zeroed my Vortex with my 100-yard zero. So that means I actually have to come back down to my zero. And now we can transition over and range that next target. Scope is still on 15 power. There we are. Let's go ahead and range. There we go, it's hitting the wrong button. 774 calls for 4.4 mils of elevation, and it's saying right 0.4. So these first rounds I'm going to hold over, hold right edge. Off the right edge, so hold on the plate. Pack. Off that right edge. Impact. A couple of windage misses there, but let's go ahead and dial on 4.4. Okay, now I will hold dead on. Impact. Impact. So again, as you can see, whether I'm holding or dialing, we're making the hits. Now let's push out a little bit further. I had planned for our next shots to be on a full-size IPSC at about 1,000 yards, but where I set the 1,000-yard target, I couldn't see it, so I just had to run down and actually push that out further. I think we're in the ballpark at 1,200 now. But with that, what I wanted to show you, when I range this, remember, I'm still dialed up from my previous shot, so my elevation turret is on 4.4. So if I go into my scope and I try to range this torso, I'm going to hold under roughly 1 mil where I'm zeroed. I get a range of 1239. But really, what we're measuring is something well above the target. So I actually, remember, have to bring my turret back down to my zero. And that's going to correct the point of aim on this Vortex. So now let me go back. And I am 1,215 yards. So by using the incorrect zero, that pushed us out about 25 yards, which at this kind of distance is a pretty major error. So for this, it's calling for 9.5 mils. It's calling for right 3/4. I do feel a little bit of a breeze now. So I'm going to hold over 9.5, and I'm going to hold right 0.75. We'll see where this lands. Scope is still on 15 power. So that's about that dot in the torso. Okay, so splashed in the dirt, just to the right of the target. The elevation's pretty close. Need to come left. About 0.5. Okay, so that one actually pushed quite a bit further. Let's go dead on. That was an impact. Sorry, I don't have my light out there, so I can't see it that well. That was off the left edge. Impact. Back. I believe those are stacking a little bit low on the plate. Impact. So I'm going to dial up actually to about 9 point. I think I'm holding about 9.7. And now we're going to put the crosshair on the target. Impact. 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 So that's it. So as you can see, whether I held or dialed, I was able to connect on that plate. That vortex right there was within 0.3 mils. So I think it was calling for 9.4, 9.5, and I was actually 9.7, 9.8. That is pretty awesome for 1,200 yards. From here, let's wrap up, and I'll give you my thoughts around summary on how these two methods stack up. All right, so that's the end of the shooting. If you made it this far, I appreciate you sticking around. Now let's take just a couple of minutes and I'll summarize my thoughts holding over versus holding dead on with my scope all the way out to 1,200 yards. And while I'm doing that, let me know in the comments, what did you think? Was there anything that you saw in this video that you found interesting or that you might try out your next range trip? I'd love to hear it. I'd love to chat with you down below. So in summary, I think what you saw in this video is both methods allowed me to put rounds on steel out to 1,200 yards. When I held over, I was down in that Christmas tree reticle, say 2 to almost 10 mils. I held over with that Tremor 3. There's plenty of precision in that reticle to make small adjustments that I needed to get on the plate. For instance, out there at 1,220, I had to make some windage adjustments as well as some elevation, and the 0.2 increments in that reticle allowed me to do that very easily. Then, when I dialed my elevation turret, I was able to hold pretty much dead on. It's a very calm day out here, so there wasn't a ton of windage. But in the 1,200 yard target, you saw me adjusting left and right based on where those rounds were impacting. So, in summary, both methods allow you to put rounds on steel. It's a little bit of user preference and maybe a little bit of training as to which method you prefer. Now, each method have their own pros and cons, and let's chat about those briefly. So when you think about dialing your elevation, the pros there are it's very simple, it's very intuitive, it's what most people are used to doing. So maybe you're training a new shooter, someone that's just getting into long range. It's easier, I believe, to just dial on their elevation correction and tell them to hold that in the crosshair, then tell them to hold over some amount down in the reticle, especially if they don't understand truly how a Christmas tree style reticle works. The other benefit of dialing your elevation is it allows you to use more magnification. So as you see in the video, when I zoom in, I have less usable reticle because it zooms in, that reticle gets bigger. Now I have less usable mil marks in that reticle. You think about holding over, it seems to work till you get to about 10 mils. So that 1,200 yard shot, we were pushing 10 mils. That's about as far as I felt comfortable because we were on 15 power. So in my opinion, very intuitive to dial and hold dead on because that's what most people are used to. The downsides to that is it's a little bit slower. You also saw when I was running this Vortex, because I zeroed the Vortex at 100 yards, for me to range correctly, I had to dial back down to 0 every time. So if I dialed up for a shot and I needed to range again, I had to come back down and then dial it up again. So maybe you're running some kind of mounted laser or rangefinder like this, you have to be at your 0 point for that to work. Now, you think about holding over, definitely some pros there, and let's talk about those. So holding over, very fast. So when you're holding over, as you saw in the intro a while back, I was able to range and hold without making any adjustments. It was very quick, very simple. So I like how fast that is. You know, you think about when you're dialing, there is chance for error there. If you forget to dial back down to 0, maybe you're shooting a long range rifle match. If you forget to come back down to your 0 point and you shoot that next stage, maybe you're off a rev, maybe you get lost. It's very easy to do when you get that adrenaline pumping. When you're holding over with your reticle, there's none of that. You're always at 0, you're always holding something, so it's a little bit, in my opinion, lower chance of error because you're not dialed up somewhere you can't forget to come back down to 0. Also, you think about holding over. With my rangefinder, it was just there. My 0.1 mil, or roughly 1 mil above my 0, held it, and I didn't have to think about where I was at in my turret to range a target. The other thing that I like about holding over, and this is actually why I transitioned to holding over versus dialing, and that is when you shoot at night. So maybe you run a clip-on in front of your day optic, you think about shooting at night, you can't see anything. You can't see your elevation turret, you can't see your windage turret. So the reason I started shooting the Tremor 3 or a Christmas tree style reticle in the first place was shooting at night because I couldn't see my elevation turret. If you're holding, it eliminates all of that. The other thing I like about holding, I talked about the error in coming back to my 0 maybe in a long range stage, just forgetting where I'm at in my turret. But you think about the internals of a scope, when you hold over, there is no mechanical error. There is no possibility for mechanical error when you're holding over in that reticle. These scopes, they're not perfect. How much money you spend, it doesn't matter. None of them are perfect. Well, your reticle, in theory, should be just about perfect because it is fixed in that scope. There's no mechanical adjustment that impacts where that bullet lands versus what you dial. So I like the idea of holding over because I feel like there is less possibility for mechanical error. Now, I know this was a long video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Maybe I've spurred some thoughts for you. I know I get a lot of comments around why I hold over on targets. Why don't I dial? Many of you would prefer to see me dial versus hold over. And in my opinion, when I'm shooting long range, if I'm 10 mils or less of elevation, I prefer to hold over. If I'm pushing out to extreme long range where I need to zoom in and get a lot of magnification, or I've got to dial on a lot of elevation, so say I'm going to shoot a mile with my 300 PRC, maybe that takes 20 mils of elevation. I want magnification and I need a lot of elevation. I have really no choice but to dial. So it just depends on what you're doing. I believe a proficient long-range shooter needs to understand how to do both because they are both tools in your long-range toolbox. And again, this was just a quick video. There's a lot more that we could get into. I appreciate you sticking around. I hope you enjoyed this one. My channel's seen a lot of growth recently, and I appreciate each and every one of you that have joined, subscribed, and check out my videos. I want to keep growing this channel, and I'm really pushing through the end of this year. I'm going to try to up my video count, and I'd ask that you would help me grow this channel. So if you like this content, hit me with a like on the video, drop me a comment, let me know what you thought. Is there something you'd like to see me try for you, or is there something that maybe you've been toying with that you want to see put into application at a distance? Or if there's something I could do better, I'd love to hear it. So let's chat about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. That's the best way to help this channel. And when you subscribe, you'll be in line for my next video. Finally, don't forget to check me out on Instagram at Mountains Mullets America. It's a great place for us to interact and chat about what's going on. I'll give you a sneak peek of what I'm working on, and maybe I can help you with your long-range journey. So if you made it this far, I really appreciate you sticking around. Thanks for watching my video. Make sure to check out the next one. There's a ton of cool stuff in the works, and it's coming very soon.